The 21st of February, 1924, 100 years ago today, Benito Mussolini gave the first live radio broadcast for the Fascist Party. It was at a radio convention, not surprisingly. I think it was the 8th convention. Radio had just been growing, and some of the radio stations in America were just established in the early 1920s. You know, WBZ around Boston, WKDKA, I think was one of the first, was the first, I think 1921. Fascist March on Rome was 1922. Mussolini is appointed prime minister because there was chaos in the streets. None of the political parties could get along. There was rioting. People were desperate to have some sort of order and some sort of relief from their economic conditions. Terrible depression going on in Italy. Lots of fuss. They needed a strong man to call things to order. So Mussolini takes it upon himself to march to Rome. He's got a lot of black-shirted fascists with him, a lot of tough guys. In fact, part of the reason they got traction was they were tougher than the communists, who were tough guys themselves. Looking to rough everybody up and deny them their nationality and take over the unions. Socialists didn't get along with the communists. Communists didn't get along with the socialists. Liberals didn't get along with either of them. So, somebody's got to seize the mic, just like there is with Reagan. Ronald Reagan was running for president. I forget which campaign, but I think it made him president. There was some meeting, and there was a shouting match that broke out in the crowd over who would get to speak. And there were a lineup of candidates, among which was Reagan. And everything was in an uproar. And Reagan famously said, well, famous for me anyway, you may not remember this, "I paid for this microphone, Mr. President." And hey, I paid for this microphone. Now, he didn't pay for the microphone at all. He was an invited guest. But he was the first one to speak. He was the first one to seize the order. It was the unity of command, which the fascist lawyer Carl Schmitt made a great deal of fuss over. In a time of crisis, and this is a go-to thing for any type of power system, there's a scary world out there. Everybody's out to kill you and strangle you. You need somebody that's going to be the ultimate authority, and is going to bring order. The man on horseback is what it's called in the Latin American authoritarian regimes. Somebody that will seize the microphone. So literally, Mussolini seizes the microphone as the medium is being born. So 1922, he ceases, he's appointed by the king as prime minister. By 1924, they pass something called the Acerbo Law, Acerbo, Acerbo, after the guy that thought it up. And what he did was make a plan among the parliament, our equivalent to the legislature, the Congress. And at the time, there were maybe 10 or 12 fascist deputies out of 330 or so. 10% of them didn't have much traction in the legislature. But what this guy cooked up was, well, the first, and nobody really had more than 25% of the vote, none of the parties. There were many parties. It wasn't a two-party system like we have here in the United States. So there were the communists, there were socialists, there was a Partito Popolare Italiano, which was kind of middle-of-the-road liberal. Nobody got along with anybody. And Cherbo said, well, look, we have to have some consensus, and we have to pass some laws here. We can't just do it with a minority. Tell you what, whoever gets past opposed to 25%, they can make some sort of allegiance to get 25% of the votes. They get to have the voting power as though they were 2/3 of Parliament. So you immediately got accelerated into 2/3 of the vote if you had a commanding majority. If you could get the first group to gather together 25%, there was such disparity, such dissent, that the fascists managed to put an alignment together where either they hated everybody else or was just captivated by the whole notion of seizing the initiative. and they turned into the Fascist Party. Inside of 2 years, it was a one-party system and a dictatorship. So by 1924, the handwriting was on the wall, and here's Mussolini on radio. Now, you have to understand the impact of the medium at the time. My mother was in a seminary in Abruzzi at the time, and the nuns would gather everybody together. Oh, Mussolini, you know, Il Duce, our leader, is speaking. And they'd set up in the courtyard a big old radio set. And it was as though Mussolini was coming to the school to talk to them directly. It's a presence. It's like an apparition. It's up until that time, for all of humanity, all of history, the notion that you could get a voice that came from hundreds of miles away and would be present among you now and happening simultaneously throughout the country was magic. That was unheard of. That was madness if you heard another voice. In fact, there was a radio program, very popular, started in about 1930 in the United States, called The Shadow. You might be familiar with the incantation at the beginning is, "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of man? The shadow knows." And the star of the radio show was this disembodied voice who was just present and would witness these various crimes and kind of would speak to the criminals, and the criminals would freak out. They, "Where's this voice coming from? He knows what I did. And the shadow knows the evil." There's a little side story too, which is Carl Jung's shadow also comes into usage about this time. And this is the hidden component of the human personality that we're all embarrassed about, that we want to hide. So this notion of a voice from within, a voice from the heavens, a voice as though it were God, that's the radio. And at the time, quantum physics was just coming around. And again, this idea of locality and non-locality, that there are events, there is power that can be projected to occur a world away simultaneously, right this very minute. Mussolini's talking in Rome right now, and he's talking in Milan right now, he's talking in Naples right now, he's in Sicily right now, he's all over the world right this very second. That was unprecedented. Nobody heard of that. Nobody knew of that. And so it magnified, accelerated politics. Franklin Roosevelt, as you know, with the fireside chats, also utilized radio. That was also very powerful political implications. And now we speculate 100 years later about social media, where we can talk back. So this is when we talked about the shadow, the idea was, here's a voice that can be here, right here with me now that I can't see. Can he see back? And the answer now is yeah. Everybody, we can talk back. It's upstream capability. Not only can we beam in the voice simultaneously from hundreds of miles away, we can beam our voices, our words, our written words, our videos across the planet and back and forth with a feedback circuit. So there are lots of political implications going on here, and we have to be very careful, because as we know, history will teach us that we can get into trouble pretty quickly. The other point I wanted to make is that this idea of representation, that reality is really a representation. It isn't really that human voice is here in the room. An electronic representation of that voice is here in the room. It's not like we're looking at World War II because we were there. We're looking at movies of World War II. And I think if you take from the 1920s to the 2020s, we may have a problem about a sense of reality, because so much of what we know of the world is on film or as a representation of the world. And when we see, and I see it a lot on YouTube, and this also, quantum physics is getting to this too, when we think of the Matrix, a lot of what fascinates us now is how real is reality to us? How much of it is a presentation? That Jim Carrey movie, The Truman Show, how much do we suspect that the world is really a play. I mean, it's all a fantasy. It's all something done for us. And I think there's a trap in that, thinking that, well, you see an insurrection in Washington, that's really that's a TV stunt. It's people dressed up. They've got makeup and costumes, and it's not for real. It's not really, really happening. We're not really going to have a fascist, are we? And I think there's a level of unreality that we have become accustomed to, especially in America. It's a little bit like lead in the plateware in ancient Rome. We're we're the ones that got the TV and the media all first, and we're the first to come in thrall to it. I think it bears some reflection. All right, thank you.